Cask ale is the lifeblood of the British beer industry and a vital part of our country's culture. It was only a few decades ago that it was all we drank in our pubs, but in the last decade or so it's been in serious, sometimes double-digit decline. The closure of our beautiful pubs and increasingly tight margins in beer all play their part, but there's also been a drop-off in interest in cask ale, especially among younger generations. Its reputation has been damaged by clichés about who drinks it and quality issues related to how hard it is to brew well and serve right. We've come to believe that cask ale at its best is the ultimate way to enjoy beer. We've fallen in love with our traditional pubs, styles, breweries and culture and hate to see it slowly falling apart. So we've decided to do something about it. 3 years ago we made a 5-part documentary exploring the British cask ale scene, through its rich history and traditions to the modern challenges and opportunities it faces. Inspired but also concerned about its future, in the last episode we came up with an ambitious plan: to lead a campaign to get cask recognised by UNESCO as intangible heritage. Since then we've been working hard behind the scenes to gather support and lobby politicians and interest groups. But we've also been collecting the evidence we'll need to present to UNESCO when the time comes. Evidence in the form that we know best: film. So in association with some fantastic beer businesses, we're thrilled to present Series 2 of Keep Cask Alive. There's an old saying that you drink with your eyes first. And there's no denying that even when you strip away the anticipation of a good pint, a beer being poured can be a beautiful thing. Especially in slow motion. Centuries of applied knowledge and experimentation have gone into brewing perfectly clear, faultless beer. A great deal of organisation, care and experience goes into serving up cool beer that cascades out of the pump with surging bubbles, golden hues and gorgeous aromas. And yet, when it comes to conversations about the best pints and perfect pours, there's one beer that dominates them all. In fact, there's a whole industry of influencers who travel the world looking for the best. Wouldn't it be great if the reverence and adoration this mass-produced, filtered and pasteurised product receives was also directed at a beer that needs more care, attention and artisanship than any nitro beer? Well, that's what we're aiming to achieve this week, as we look at what goes into brewing crystal clear, foamy and delicious cask, and then what goes into pouring it right. Starting at what might be, right now, the most famous pub in the world. Hey Beer Geeks, now today's episode is all about the perfect pour, what goes into making the perfect pint and what goes into serving the perfect pint. And these days, if you've ever been on Instagram, if you're thinking about those two things, you're probably thinking of a very certain pub and a very specific brand. But what if I told you that the owner of this establishment drinks a very different beer and indeed believes that caring for and serving it is much harder than pouring a pint of this, and indeed much more enjoyable once you've done so? Of course, I'm talking about Cask. Anybody want a pint of Guinness? Soho's the Devonshire has become an internet sensation since it opened in late 2023. Co-owned by pub industry legend Oisin Rogers, it's found just off Piccadilly Circus. It has its own on-site butchery serving an upstairs restaurant and making unreal bar snacks like these Iberico sausages, which you can snack on while you peruse their 22 keg lines, at least 6 of which seem to be Guinness. For most people, that's the only choice here, because it's regularly voted the best pint of Guinness in London, and the Devonshire sells inconceivable amounts of it. But more interesting to us is what bookends all these taps. At the end of each bar are 3 cask pumps, and it's here that we got chatting to Oisin, puller of London's most famous pint, about what goes into pouring great beer, and why when he has a beer, it's cask ale he reaches for.
I started off in pubs in London in 1989. I didn't know anything about cask beer, but what I did know was that at that time we sold about as much cask as lager. Right. And so lager was still, just overtaking cask ale. And over my 35 years I've seen it dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And it's my drink of choice. I love cask beer, as everyone knows. And it's weird how it's kind of fading a little bit from the narrative of what beer is. And for me, it's English beer. You know, we use this Timothy Taylor Landlord, which for me is the best beer in the country. I love it. And it comes up creamy like that, beautiful. And then we do a second top on it, just to get the right head on it. Yeah, so you get this wonderful, tight creaminess happening, and this kind of soapy bubbles on the top. So make a nice head on it before we bring it to the top.
Of course,
and it tastes amazing.
Got sparkle on a northern pint and not on a
that's
southern
correct.
pint.
That's correct, though. That's correct. So your northern pint should have this, you know, creamy head, and it makes it so delicious. And you know, as I said, it's what I drink all the time.
Yeah.
Did you want me to do a Pride as well?
I'd love it. I'll take a Pride if you take a Timmy's.
No worries. Well, that goes in one go. So you can see it's a different kind of texture on the heads. You get much more sort of soapy bubbles.
Yeah.
But of course, they come from the natural conditioning in the cellar, because we do the secondary fermentation downstairs.
Yep.
And there you go. Look at that one.
So tell me a bit about that. Obviously, the Devonshire is really famous for its Guinness pour, which, you know, takes knowledge and pride and throughput.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Cask feels to me like it's still a greater effort even than that to make sure it's in tip-top condition.
well, we do put a fair bit of effort into the Guinness, but for me, you need more expertise for this to get it absolutely right, because of course, when it comes in, it's not ready for sale. It's got residual sugar in there, and the yeast is still alive, so you've got to give it a good old shake. You've got to breach the barrel, let the air get to it, so the yeast continues to ferment, falls to the bottom over a period of 24 hours, and then when it's clear, beautiful, crystal clear like it is at the bottom of that pint, we'll connect it up and serve it through the old-fashioned pumps. So it's the strength of your arm bringing it up from the cellar, and it's a far more natural product than anything else in our bar.
What's so interesting about, like, Guinness has like this theatre of the pour, right, which people almost fetishise. You get the same with a sparkled pint, right?
Well, I
you
think
get this
so.
kind of gorgeous, slow
I think so.
settle.
You're going to try it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll take the Timmy's.
I'm having Taylor. Sorry, you're on the London Pride. That's the way it goes.
Fair enough.
Cheers.
Okay,
good to see you.
cheers.
I mean, it's delicious. You know, for me, that's as good a pint as you get in the UK. And sometimes it drives me mad that our sales of this, while they're big compared to some other pubs, they're really low compared to the Guinness. And I'd love more people to be drinking this, as I do every day.
Yeah. Well, hopefully our campaign with UNESCO is going to help us explain to people the joy that goes into a pint and that goes into drinking it, and you're doing God's work here.
Well, cheers to that. I wish you the very best of luck with it, because it is God's work.
We've already done a video on how to care for cask ale. In fact, it was the first ever episode of Keep Cask Alive. And we've dedicated countless videos to the technicalities of great and not so great tasting beer. So today, like the ginfluencers of Ginstagram, we're focusing on the look, starting with how brewers create perfectly clear beer. Doing so lets us tell a story that's rarely mentioned and indeed often skirted around in the history of beer. To do so, I headed up to Burton-on-Trent, a town built on its incredible brewing reputation, but sadly now in a tragic state of decline, as I found out while walking off a hangover on my way to that morning shoot.
So this morning I thought I would take a walk around Burton, and not just because I had quite a few pints of Burton Bridge bitter and Bass and a curry last night, and maybe a kebab, not quite sure. But the reason I wanted to walk around Burton is because it is essentially a physical manifestation of what happens when you rip industry, when you rip particularly the brewing industry out of a town. And you can see it written all over Burton-on-Trent. The scars of what were once brewing buildings, malting buildings, the incredible old Bass pump house now just covered in ivy and weeds and pumping out this horrible sludge, not quite sure what's going on there. And really, this town should be a tourist destination, like the Guinness storehouses in Dublin and the Budweiser factory in St. Louis. This was once the capital of brewing worldwide. Two of the largest breweries ever to have existed were in this town. This whole town was built around it. It was a brewing town where everybody who lived in these houses worked in the breweries. And that has been stripped out not just by unscrupulous councils and developers, but by breweries themselves, by keg breweries, by massive breweries like Coors and like Carlsberg, who still own much of the town, but are doing nothing about the British heritage that they own. Now we are here to tell a very particular story. story of something that has actually survived. The breweries are mostly gone. The only one of any scale remaining, Marston's, is under threat. And in fact, the museum to all of these incredible places is now gone. It has been removed and turned into what causes offices. But one thing that has survived all of this is isinglass, the fifth beetle of cask ale, the fifth ingredient, and it's that story we're going to tell today.
For those who don't know, isinglass is a beer clarification agent that's been used for 2 centuries to create pin-bright beer without the need for centrifuging, filtering or lagering. Indeed, some studies have shown that it's more effective than all of those methods. The controversy comes from the fact that it's derived from the swim bladders of tropical fish, meaning any beer made with it could be considered unsuitable for vegetarians. Of course, it's also given rise to worries about fish product actually being in the final beer. We'll dig into these discussions later, but I think it's really important to understand isinglass's history and significance first. So I sat down with Brent Jordan, General Manager at Yeast Supply Lallemand, which produces most of the UK's isinglass through its subsidiary AB Vickers.
So let's start at the beginning. What is the history of isinglass? Where did it come from? How did we find out about it?
As far as we're aware, isinglass was first kind of demonstrated in probably the land of Egypt many thousands of years ago, when they would store fermented beverages in large fish maws that were of suitable size and geometry to store wine and even beers in. And the legend goes that they would store these drinks in these vessels just out of convenience, but then they would realize that these beverages were clearer out of these vessels than if they stored them in stone pots and things. So I think that's how the origin of the functionality of isinglass itself was discovered. Move forward a few thousand years, and isinglass was actually recognized or put forward as being of nutritional benefit. And a company in Coggeshall in Essex from about the 1840s was promoting the use of isinglass as a nutritional substance for invalids and for confectionery purposes. So it was used in jellies, and also it was just eaten as well. So, and this is one of the original packs of Swinburne's isinglass. It's probably the only pack in existence. And
Somebody's had a go at some.
So yeah, somebody's had a little nibble. And you can see in here, I don't know how close the camera can get, you can see the very, very fine, almost hair-like nature.
Yeah, like vermicelli noodle kind.
Vermicelli noodle. So it took some manufacturing. So that's really, for intents and purposes, that's the beginning of isinglass as a manufactured product. From around the 1850s, when the production of beer became really quite prevalent in the UK, and isinglass was used to clarify beer, but with the upsurge in beer production, isinglass also took a bit of an upswing, and it became very, very important industrial industry, so to speak.
Why was like clarity in beer so important? Because I guess, was it like around the advent of glass, or the Pilsners of the Czech Republic starting to spread around the world?
It's a good question. I guess the point about glass could be a good one, but beer being served in glass rather than tankards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an old saying in the industry that you drink with your eyes, and it's really, as with many things, clarity is one of the first indicators of quality. And I think that was probably the reason that isinglass became such a big part of the brewing industry, that people expected beer to be clear. Mm-hmm. It was such a big business. There was a lot of money in it, and there were a lot of characters in it as well. And it had an impact on British society, truly.
So you've been telling me about these kind of mad stories of the impact that isinglass had at the time, which includes this rather handsome fellow on the wall behind you, and maybe this thing, which we'll get to. So tell me about there was a horse named Isinglass. It had that public a reputation.
Yeah, one of my colleagues asked me, why would you name a horse Isinglass? And where do you get a name for any horse from? It's usually
They've
something.
run out of ideas centuries
yeah,
before,
it's
clearly.
a topical situation or a personal connection or something, and it just shows how well known Isinglass was in British society. That somebody named a racehorse, not just any old racehorse. This racehorse only ran 12 races. It won 11.
Wow.
It, at the time, in one of its years, it was the biggest prize winner at, I think, 56,000 guineas. One of only 6 horses to win the 2,000 guineas, the St. Leger, and what was the other one? Anyway, one of the three big races. So this horse was a very famous horse. It died, I think, in around 1911. Its skeleton is now preserved in the Natural History Museum. And its box at, I think, Chieveley is still there with isinglass named above the box.
Wow.
So this was a very famous horse. There was a locomotive named Isinglass as well. If I could draw your attention to this piece here.
I think that the attention's already been drawn, I'd imagine, but when people know what this is.
This is, basically a bouquet of flowers produced only from fine isinglass leaves. There is a lot of processing gone into this. And this piece was produced to mark the birthday of James Vickers in 1851 is the date there. And this was manufactured by a group of nuns in Belgium.
Of course.
So in terms of cultural significance, this shows us that isinglass was also appreciated outside of the UK to the degree that this religious order celebrated by putting many hundreds of hours into this particular piece, the only piece of its kind in the world. And it's really quite unique.
But as you've discovered, not that valuable.
Not that valuable. I don't know.
So well on eBay.
I guess to certain individuals it would have great value. It has great value to me. Could I say emotionally? But it's kind of true because I've been in the business all of my life, and this is whenever I see this, it reminds me of how unique this business is, how special it is, and how much has been invested in this business by so many people over so many hundreds of years.
You know, in my head before I came here, it was very much, I guess, you know, a processing aid, which is what people might call it, that goes into the beer, and people don't really give it that much of a thought. Whereas from what I've learned here, it started off as, if not necessarily an artisan endeavour, like certainly incredibly complicated, hands-on, one that involves a huge amount of knowledge and skill to understand. There's blending, there's the sourcing of it.
Yeah.
And we will start to lose that knowledge and that whole industry as cask ale declines. So they're tied in together, the fate of both.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's like an artisan industry. I'd say it is an artisan industry. Mm-hmm. There's a great deal of skill involved in producing good quality isinglass.
I'll bet you didn't have wanting to know more about fish swim bladders on your bingo card for this year, but hopefully you can see why I put the history bit first. The significance of what is effectively the 5th ingredient of cask ale is hard to understate, and it's still used by the majority of cask ale brewers today. Before we dig into the science of why, here's how it's made and what actually goes into the beer.
So we're in the production site of AB Vickers, where you produce isinglass, and probably the question on everybody's lips is, what is isinglass? What is it originally? Where does it start?
Isinglass is it starts with fish and certain species of subtropical fish. At source, out in Southeast Asia in particular, the local fishermen, they go out and they catch the fish for food, and then the buoyancy organ of the fish, it's called the swim bladder, is taken by those fishermen, and they dry it, and they clean it, and they store it in approved facilities, and in that dry form we import into the UK, and that is our primary raw material for the production of isinglass.
So this dried, clean stuff, it comes over here. We've seen a truck arrive with it today. Yeah. What are the steps to turn that from, you know, dried isinglass to what's sent out to breweries?
Okay, well, you've seen the truck, and generally the truck will contain 10 tons of this product. So it's quite a bit.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine in its dried form, it's like shoe leather in texture. It's very tough. So the first thing we do is we take a very powerful chopping machine and we chop it into pieces about 1 inch square. That's the starting stage of the process. We then take these pieces and we put them through a sterilizing process and a cleaning process. And this makes the product white and ensures that it's microbiologically pure. We go from that stage then to a soaking process to make it nice and pliable and soft. And we then put it through an extruder. Then we have to dry that. Now the issue with isinglass, it's very temperature sensitive. So we have to make sure that it's dried in a very moderate temperature with lots of airflow. That's to prevent the product from degrading. So that drying process can take 2 to 3 days in a warm room with good airflow through it.
Is that why you use tropical fish, so that the temperature that you can do it at is a little bit higher, I guess?
It's a little bit higher than cold water fish. So we then have these dry pellets almost of product. We then put that through a mill, we grind it, and then we can divert that to various product streams depending on the final customer requirement. Or we can, earlier on in the process, we divert to a liquid stream, which is primarily for the UK brewing industry.
So from the original fish, there's a huge amount of processing that happens to make it this very pure, essentially protein that just happens to have been derived from a fish.
Yeah, and the final product, whether it be in liquid form or in dry powder form, is it's pretty much sterile. It's probably not far short of, if not achieving, a pharmaceutical standard in terms of quality.
So while isinglass is fish-derived, the final product can be further removed from its origin. It's essentially a protein in powder or liquid form that's added to the beer at the point of packaging, where its unique properties come into play. To explain them, I spoke to Sarah Young, Global Product Manager.
So we've seen how it's made, and this is the final product, right? So this is, lots of people worry that there's literal fish in their beer, but this is, it's a cloudy, whitish liquid.
White liquid, yes.
Yeah.
Slightly viscous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, ever so slightly jellified kind of thing. So what is the actual role of this when it comes to brewing cask ale?
Well, basically, what you're trying to remove in a cask beer is yeast and protein, and to make beer bright. That's
what the haze is in beer. It's protein.
It's protein and it's yeast cells. So basically, isinglass is basically a protein. It's collagen. That is the main function of them. Collagen is basically a very rigid triple helix of protein. When it goes into beer pH, it exhibits a positive charge, and because yeast is negative charge, that is basically the interaction that you have in the beer. It takes out yeast, so it'll attract the yeast and then it will flocculate down. If you look here at these two samples, one is treated with isinglass and one isn't treated with isinglass. And as you can see, this one is much, much brighter, as reminiscent of a cask beer that you have poured in the pub. Also, isinglass is actually an amphoteric molecule. It has positive and a negative charge at beer pH. And as a result of this, it can take out some beer protein as well. So it's very, very useful. It's perfect for cask beer.
Feels like a relatively simple process, even if you've thrown a lot of words at me there. Why is it that this particular collagen from the swim bladders of fish is so good at this role, and we haven't found an alternative that is anywhere near as good?
Oh, there are other products out there that will take out. The other products will generally take out protein and take out yeast almost as like a secondary fining action. It creates a net and it brings everything down. Whereas isinglass actually functionally takes out the yeast and it produces a nice compact sediment. And some of the other fining agents you can use obviously the sediments aren't quite as compact, and also as we mentioned yesterday as well, when the beer is going from the brewery to the dray to the pubs, it's getting moved all the time, and each time it's getting moved, these flocks are getting broken up. So with isinglass, the flock does tend to be slightly larger, more stable, so when it flocculates back down again, it's quicker, and the sediment remains more integral, it takes more intact, and it doesn't go as loose and fluffy.
What I've sort of learned is that the point of isinglass is it's not in your beer. It is dropped out.
The residual amount of isinglass left in beer, a properly refined beer at the end of when it's still aged, is absolutely minimal. I don't know what kind of analogy to use, but it is minute.
Now, I'm not going to lie. Before going to Burton, I had a completely different perspective on isinglass. I saw it as an old practice, bound to change with the times and once breweries trusted other methods enough. But from both a technical perspective, in how incredible it is at clearing beer, and a historical one with the remarkable story and tradition that comes with it, I'm now glad that many breweries have stuck with isinglass and will likely do so for a long time. Anyway, there's a debate that whips up more opinions than even isinglass for us to address next. A topic so divisive that some consider it the line that separates the north from the south of England. I'm talking, of course, of the sparkler. A tiny bit of plastic on the end of a tap that forces beer through a set of tiny holes and, depending on your point of view, either makes or breaks a cask beer. To start this debate, I thought we'd go to the most mild-mannered and reasonable brewer we know, which means a trip back to Timothy Taylor's and a pint with head brewer Andy Leman.
Well, first of all, I have to admit, I'm originally a southerner. I grew up drinking Wadworth 6X, which was always as flat as a mill pond, brimful in a handle glass usually. And it works differently for different beers. So southern English beers from traditional breweries tend to be very delicate hop flavours. And where in the north, the beers do tend to be a bit more bitter, a bit more robust. And if you put a southern beer through a sparkler, I think it ruins it, because you lose a lot of the flavour out of the beer.
Right.
Because the effect of the sparkler, which is what we use in the north, is to agitate the beer, and some of those delicate aromatics will just disappear out the top of the glass.
Yeah, it's almost like a sort of sprinkler in the way that it kind of pushes the beer.
Yeah.
Out,
Some
right?
people call them sprinklers, some sparklers.
Yeah.
I call these sparklers because that's what they always were to me.
Yeah.
And sprinklers, the one where you sprinkle onto the top of the beer, which does happen in London and down south, where they have a device on the end which does do that, has that effect.
This little bit of plastic has caused so much consternation between the north and the south. It's unbelievable. I think we're really at odds about it, but it makes so much sense. Now you said about the southern beers maybe being a little more subtle with the flavours, and maybe lose some of that aromatic stuff when it falls through a sparkler.
So our beers, we taste them in a sample room without going through a hand pump or anything, because we're looking for close differences between things, without the effect of a hand pump. But it tastes quite harsh in our sample room. However, when you pull it through the sparkler, it slightly softens the beer.
Right.
And that's what I mean about it's brewed to be served that way, because it needs the softening effect of the sparkler on the hand pump.
So it's amazing. I mean, like, cask ale is amazing anyway, because it's alive, it's the fresh bread of beer, and it hasn't finished its journey till it comes through the beer engine.
That's
but
right,
even so, like, considering all of that, the cellaring, everything that's happening below us, that little bit of plastic there, you're brewing your recipes for that.
Yes,
ultimately.
Ultimately, that's the last bit it goes through.
Port of
It
call.
gets in the glass.
Yeah. I love it. I tell you what is even more beautiful right now is a perfect pour of Boltmaker. Can you help us with that? I'd love to see you do it.
I'll do my best.
Brilliant.
So as we say, we've got the swan neck here, so the bottom of the glass goes right
All the way
onto
to the bottom.
sparkler.
Yep.
And then we start pulling, so 4 pulls for a pint. And as you'll see, I'll do it as quickly as possible so that you can see the...
Creates like a whirlpool
Cascading.
effect, doesn't it? As well as the cascade as it's
it
going
does.
around, it's really churning
It really
it.
does, and that's what creates the lovely
Look at that.
creamy head on the beer.
Doesn't get much better than that, I tell you.
So then we leave that to settle on the bar, and people can see how great that looks.
Yes.
It entices them. They think it's going to be a great beer before they've even tasted it. So.
It's creamy, it's soft, it's inviting. The North's warm embrace, I feel it, Andy, I really do. I'm absolutely convinced, mate.
As always, Andy is a faucet of wisdom and calm, but to truly determine if his rules apply, or if the North or the South is right, we need a side-by-side comparison. Neither me nor Brad were brave enough to ask for a landlord without a sparkler from Andy, so instead we waited until we got a safe distance to pour another iconic beer both with and without a sparkler. That safe distance was in central London, and one of its most ancient pubs, the Old Mitre, in Hatton Garden. So today, Bradley and I are going to try to settle the world's oldest pub argument, the ultimate of first world problems, and that is sparkler or no
sparkler, and we're going to be doing that by committing sacrilege and annoying both the north and indeed the south. So what's about to happen is I'm going to be pouring a pint of Fuller's London Pride with a sparkler, and then I'm going to remove that sparkler and pour it the southern way without a sparkler, then sit down and decide once and for all that we should probably sit on the fence. So I'm going to grab a pint. I don't really know how this is going to go because Fuller's London Pride is not generally designed to be served on sparkler. The wonderful manager here at the Old Mitre has installed a mad looking extra long sparkler because that's not really what's done here in London. So we'll just see how this goes. And you can hear the beer being forced through those tiny, tiny bubbles, creating that really fine mousse head. That gives it loads of stability, forces air through the pint, creates that creamy, creamy texture. So there you go, you get that almost Guinness-like cascading effect, lots of beautiful creamy head on the top. Even from a southerner, you're not going to hear me deny that that looks like a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I'm already thirsty thinking about it. So let's take the sparkler off and serve this beer the way that it's supposed to be served. So we pour hard. Contrary to what people believe, you should not have a complete lack of head on a pint in the south. It just shouldn't be a creamy head. Again, much quicker to pour when you haven't got to force it through the tiny, tiny holes. So here we have our tightly sparkled, beautiful creamy head on our northern poured pint. And here we have still less tight bubbles, but still a nice, stable head on top of our southern poured pint. So Bradley, it's beer / sitting on the fence time. So here we go, Bradley. 4 pints on the bar, 2 sparkled in the middle.
Yeah.
Looking glorious, creamy, 2 on the edges. We've been lining up this shot for a while, but they still retain their head, looking glorious. Where do you want to start the comparison? Do we go with sparkle because that's what we've been drinking with Andy Le Man?
I don't know. I'm a man of the south, Johnny. I feel like it would only be fair to drink the intended way first.
Oh, okay. All right.
You want to drink the other way
We'll start
first.
disagreeing and go on from there. Cool. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah.
So it's in perfect condition. It's got that classic Fuller's kind of marmalade, caramel, little bit toasty, but spiky bubbles.
Yes.
Not a big creamy head on your moustache there.
No, moustache is unscathed.
Yeah, but that's very familiar to me and very delicious. Let's see how it compares directly going from there and into a sparkled. Cheers again.
Cheers.
To me, obviously much, much finer bubbles.
Yeah.
So it's torn apart like those big bubbles. Made them into little
Velvety
ones. So
bubbles.
it's velvety, it's moussey,
Yeah.
a little bit more akin to Guinness like we started this episode. I don't know whether it's my palate adjusting, first pint of the day, or whether that sparkling has kind of knocked off a bit of the kind of toastiness, the kind of the background malty depth.
Are you saying that the sparkler might have knocked some of the flavour out of it, Johnny?
I'm not saying it's knocking the flavour, I'm changing it. I'm saying it's changing
It's definitely
the flavour.
changed it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's 100% changed it. Has it made it more bitter? I feel like I've just gone back and forth a bit there, but that seemed a bit more bitter to me.
This is very scientific. Do you know what? I see what you mean in that I think that you've got lots more bubbles attacking your tongue.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it is bitterness, it's
No,
just
it's the
the
sensation.
carbonic bite
Yeah.
of the bubbles seems a bit more intense.
Ferocious.
Yeah, like a million tiny needles instead of some sort of bigger ones.
It sounds painful, Johnny, but they both taste absolutely delicious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be the conclusion. I know we joked about fence sitting. The conclusion has to be that sparkling a beer and not sparkling a beer does not ruin the beer. That
No.
neither of these beers have been ruined by the way that they've been poured.
No.
And both of them pale in comparison to just having very well cared for, delicious fresh cask beer, which we're obviously going to have at a pub like this. As for a preference, would you have a preference for this beer?
I'd have to go non-sparkle, just because the memories that are locked in my brain of drinking Pride, and the flavours I'm getting from it are more in sync with the non-sparkled.
Like, actually, last night we drank a Timothy Taylor's unsparkled.
We
What
did.
did you think of that?
It was delicious, but it was wrong. So it should have been sparkled. If you're in the north, it should be on a sparkler. If you're in the south, probably not. But I'm not going to hate you if you bring your own sparkler along and screw it on.
Yeah. I think that's a bit far, bringing your own sparklers to bars. I'm not sure how hygienic that is either.
No,
but I
it's
think
probably
I really enjoy sort of the pale, bittersweet Yorkshire and Lancashire bitters through sparklers. And I think they've sort of grown up together. Whereas once I'm down south, Harvey's through a sparkler would not be right. I don't think London Pride is quite right. I miss those big bubbles, that kind of almost just like really popping off your tongue kind of vibe. And I think that's true of a lot of the beers down here. So I think there is sort of a recipe and an approach that's different. And maybe a very vague rule could be northern beers on sparkler, southern beers not. But I think the key thing to get across is trust the pub, trust the brewer. So, in honour of sitting on the fence, you've gone non-sparkled, I've gone sparkled.
They're both great.
They're both great. The perfect pint is the one you're holding.
I'll drink to that.
I'll do something better and be out.
Obviously we're biased, but both Brad and I think there are few sights more glorious than a pint of cask ale being poured. Whether it's the cascade of a tightly sparkled Yorkshire bitter, or the frothy dome of a southern amber, there's just as much theatre in a cask pour as there is in a Guinness, but arguably more care, attention and artisanship has gone into caring for and pouring it. The very fact that we can make a riveting 40-minute documentary just about the clarifying agent and a bit of plastic it's sometimes poured through should be testament to that. So let's keep talking about cascades, domes and lacings, about creamers, best pints, 10s and perfect pours, whatever the beer style. But let's champion the idea that a great pub serving great cask from great breweries is really what we should all be scrolling and searching for.